So welcome to another war game review from theplayers8.com. My name's Alexander.
And I'm Grant.
And today we're taking a look at North Africa 41.
Booyah.
From GMT Games. So this is the latest design by Mark Simonich. This is part, loosely, of his 40X series.
It is very different, though.
Yes.
It has some similarities, and if you go into the game playing it like you do some of the other Zachbon games, you're not going to do well.
No.
So get that out of your mind. This is different.
So this is a two-player Hex Encounter World War II game, and it is the Western Desert in North Africa in 1941, as you may have guessed from the title. Stunning artwork on the front of the box, by the way.
Is it Antonis Karidis?
Yes, it is.
Okay, he's just excellent.
Yeah. And
I don't know. I have never seen him draw dudes, right? It's mainly aircraft and machine. So,
yes.
Well, I mean, there's dudes.
There's a couple dudes, but I've been on his website. He does aircraft and military tanks and stuff.
Good,
like that's what he does. He's
skilled.
And I just love a good Panzer III on the front of a box.
Short barrel too. I love that. Oof. That's pretty nice.
So
look at the dust too. It just looks so arid. Anyway.
And that's pretty much what this game is. So this is just 1941, so you don't get into 42. But it's the whole campaign is literally the Axis have no one on the board. And they have to drive all the way across the board and then mostly drive halfway back again. That's the reality of what's going to happen throughout the flow and course of the game. Mm-hmm. How far they get is a different story. But there's a few different smaller scenarios in it. There is I think it's a 9-turn early war scenario, and there is a 3-turn late war scenario as well if you want to change it up, because this is not a short game. Even the short scenario is only like 9 action phases, where we both get the full action phase, but...
Well, it's 3 turns with 3 action phases within each turn.
Yeah.
So it's 9 turns, basically.
But you do a lot within one of those action phases.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot to consider, because this is a very detailed game. Mm-hmm. And so, your first few plays of this, even that short scenario, is going to take you a good chunk of time in reality.
I think we've been playing this for like 3 hours, 3.5 hours, and we didn't finish this short scenario.
No.
But
that's so
very involved too.
Yeah.
Right?
Whereas I feel like you play something like Salerno 43 in the same series, you can play that short campaign in there and it plays very quickly.
And I would say Salerno 43 is really an introduction to this system, I think. This is not the same system, but it's based on the system.
Yes.
But it's a lot more crunchy. This has a lot more details, a lot more focus on supply, which is typical for a North Africa game.
Yes.
And there's a lot of... Using that supply is the hard part. It's not just being in supply. Most war games, it's like, are you in supply? This one, you use it for combat. You have to have supply to activate any more than 9 combat factors. And to have a good attack, you're going to have to do that fairly often.
Yes.
Right? This is not a kind CRT for the attacker.
Which is interesting you say that, because I think it is. Look at the 1 to 2 table.
I would agree with that one.
Right?
At some of the lower ones, but maybe I'm wrong.
But I think it's kind to the attacker, but it's very expensive to activate them.
It is.
And so you're punished from the supply standpoint rather than from the CRT standpoint. If you're going to roll, even at 1 to 2, it's a 50-50 that you will do something.
Yeah,
you're going to take some damage as well, but...
As the attacker...
4, 5, or 6, you're going to at least do 1 damage to them or force them to move. You're going to take some damage as well.
Well, I guess what I'm saying, those 5 results are bad for the attacker.
But that's also bad for the defender. Well, you still dislodge someone that someone else can move.
You're right. But if you're going to be doing that a lot, you're dumb.
No.
I'm sorry, you're dumb.
But there are times where you kind of have to.
Well, you have to take a chance.
Whereas a 1 to 2 table in every other game, there would be 1 good result at the bottom, and everything else would be very
There's
bad.
at least a couple there. So yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe I was wrong in that assertion.
Maybe it's not It's not as punishing as I've seen at other CRTs.
Yeah.
But you're punished from your supply mechanism in
Yep.
this game.
Yep.
Because it's so expensive to launch any kind of feasible attack.
Yeah. Well, and it's that 9 combat factor rule, right? You
Yeah.
can activate as many units as you want. You can have a stack of 5 units, but you can only use 9 combat factors if you're not going to use a supply point.
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't have a supply point, and you might be like, well, I got to attack. It's a 1-to-1. Let's go.
Yeah, I used 2 of my 5 guys.
But if you can activate that tank bonus using the tank differential and the combined arms bonus from Elite, those things make a difference. And all of a sudden that 1-to-1 or maybe 2-to-1 becomes a 3, 4, or 5-to-1.
But then you don't get the tank shift unless you spend the supply as well.
No, you're right. Yep.
And so it's like...
It's expensive. It's extremely expensive.
It's such an interesting
Yeah.
kind of dichotomy between lots of real kind of crappy attacks,
Yeah.
where it is very random, rolling on that 1-to-1 table,
Or focus on 1 or 2 good attacks.
and then throw in the
that
1
are
or
well
2
supplied.
really strong
Yeah.
attacks. And I really like that you see the kind of difference between those 2 big set piece battles and these little kind of almost skirmish type things.
Sure.
That's really fun to see the difference. But
Well, and it was so interesting too, the different assets that you have, you're going to get those from your random events table.
yeah, you get your resources,
Things
and
like
you get stuff.
air support or those kind of things. And the Germans always have Rommel. Now it's only once a turn in the 3 activations, but how many times did I use that to re-roll a die that was just so bad?
You re-rolled it into something worse once,
I know.
even, which was...
Yeah, thanks for reminding me. That made me
That was
really unhappy. I should have just accepted the bad result.
But you never know.
No, you
can
never know.
that
That's the fun of these war games, right? It's
the gamble didn't pay off.
No, the gamble didn't pay off. The one thing that I want to say about, I think all North Africa games, in their DNA, there's 3 things, right? There's more than that, but to boil it down to 3 things, it's the scale and the vastness of North Africa. This is a very cool map, right? It's not a traditional 22 by 34.
No, it's 34 by 17, I think.
So it's an odd-shaped map. There are 2 of them, and it's very long because it's really just focused on the ocean stuff and maybe 100 miles in, right?
This is 22 by 34. This is 22 by 17.
Yeah, it's a little smaller.
But yeah, it's long and thin, and everything faces one side of the board, so we sat next to each other to play it instead of opposite.
Which is very different. So that, once again, that vastness of North Africa, to get from this end of the map to this side, it's going to take you a couple of turns.
Yeah.
That's why you got to take advantage of some of the special rules, like we called it the warping of the
your
trucks.
Your special truck transfer rules.
Where if you have an in-supply combat unit anywhere in the map, you can take a truck from here all the way over to that and then drive it onto your supply point. Very important, and I think I would do that very differently.
Or you stack units with your supply points at that given juncture where you can drive the supply on 20 spaces.
Yep.
He's going to sit there, and I walk my truck back to that.
Yep, and drive again.
And then I drive a new one on, and then I walk that back.
It's like a convoy, right?
It's exactly like a convoy.
And we weren't really good at that. I wasn't.
No, I was not good at that either.
I've got to figure out how, and next time I would do that differently. That's obviously something I would do. But that concept of the vastness, the focus on supply, we're already talking about that. We'll talk about that more. The supply in here, though, is very cool and unique. It's combat focused, as we mentioned, activating those things, but also keeping your units in supply based on your ports, which are very cool. Those can be damaged, right? You can bomb them and attack them, and all of a sudden you can only supply, say in Tobruk, at first you could do 8 units, and then I hit you once, and it's like you can only supply 4 units, but you've got 9 units there, and man, if I could have hit you one more time, all of a sudden in 2 or 3 rounds, if you can't repair that, you're seriously going to be taking some real attrition and step losses, right? Ultimately over time. The third thing, though, is always this focus on but convoys from Malta and Italy. Very well done here. There's a little bit of an abstraction.
Yes, without being too complicated.
Yeah, but it keeps it fun and light, and interesting. I'm not sure I figured out how to do it very well. It ties into the events that you roll, which is kind of cool. But that's a neat part. It has all three of those elements, and it really is indicative of the North African front. I really like what Mark has done here.
Yeah, one of the things that I really enjoyed, but was something to contend with, was this whole supply aspect of it. Any of the reviews or videos that you watch about this game or read about, they will talk about supply in this, because the reality is you have this pretty traditional hex encounter war game with, it's not quite the Zarkbon system, but it's not too dissimilar from it.
Right.
So you have that as the kind of core of this game, but it's built on this supply skeleton, which is a whole other game you're playing on, like, within this, because you have to efficiently convoy and move your supply points to the front with trucks that you're activating and moving those, picking up supply points, driving those supply points, using those as like supply extenders for supply lines when you're going in and around the desert where there's no roads. But also you're then spending those supplies to launch attacks. But if you expend that supply to launch an attack, that truck is now no longer a range extender. And so all your guys better be able to get themselves into supply now that you've done that.
They got to be close to roads.
Or have multiple trucks doing this in there. And so it reminded me very much of OCS.
There's no doubt.
This is the
extender concept
down from that.
Yep.
Because in that one, it's like you have to throw your supply to every single one of your units you want to activate. Whereas in this one, it's like you can activate units. They're not, for these little attacks. It's just really for those big attacks and for getting those extra comp shifts and bonuses.
Didn't BCS have the throwing of the no? Those were baggage trains. They were combat trains.
And really, that's just kind of placement. So that you can be in supply. This is a much more proactive system that was. I'd love to hear from an OCS buff to see like how much they think it's similar, but to me it felt very similar from how proactive the supply is in
because
this
we've
one.
only been exposed to OCS really Smolensk, and we didn't necessarily play a whole lot, just a little bit.
But that was one of the big concepts of it, and this was very similar where it's not quite as detailed as that, but it's physically moving your supply with either trucks that become MSUs, their multi-uses, and then using those to either refresh your artillery or HQs, or to launch. There's so much you can do with it. It really is like this whole other game baked into a normal hex encounter game. And as such, that it makes the gameplay during your first game or two a little bit slower, because there's so much more to consider, very detailed. I found myself counting hexes a lot, because it's when I was cutting across the desert, it's like, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I gotta have a truck here.
But then like my 5 truck can go back to another 5 truck, and he can go back to a road. And so it's making these daisy chains of all this stuff was really, you have to keep it in your mind.
Well, the other thing I really enjoyed about the concept of the ASUs, artillery supply units, and the mobile supply units was, and we made a joke of it, right? Well, I can shoot this artillery supply unit to make them fight, right? But it was like, oh, I'm throwing them hamburgers.
Yeah, if the ASU is stacked with a supply point,
they can.
They use the ASU's range instead of its own range, like it's shooting the hot dogs and hamburgers across.
We were
the map.
joking about it.
It's pretty funny.
Yeah, when you think about it, that's kind of.
I'm sure there's some designer notes in the playbook, because I want to read about what it is about like those like ASU units that allowed that to happen. Like what in practicality, what's happening? Like is that just better command and control from those guys to send it out? I guess. Yeah. Very interesting though.
Yeah, a lot to like. I think this is going to be a hex encounter war game that a lot of people hopefully will enjoy, and it will get them into a new aspect of it, a more supply focused aspect. And I would love to see more.
I just don't know, because it works well because it's a North Africa game.
You're right.
And so I would be curious to see if
the East Front, I think it would work. It's like OCS, like we talked about.
Yeah,
it's just a little different. I get it. It's a little different.
Yeah, but you know, how much does it work the same way? I don't know.
Sure,
I'm not smart enough to know that.
Could something like this kind of simulate some of the stuff in Vietnam with the Ho Chi Minh Trail and the trucks going up and down? And
maybe.
I don't know. Just something to think about. But I really enjoyed that. Right? It's something that people are going to play, and it's going to feel very different.
Yes.
Unless they've played a lot of supply-based OCS style games. Every game has supply in it.
But
I want to make that clear.
How big of a system and how proactive it is made this game feel very different from the other ones in this kind of 40.
Made it feel fresh.
Yeah, it was a very different challenge. And honestly, the way that it worked felt very different from my other North Africa games that I've played.
Yeah.
You know, even a lot of those are much simpler, with just like, here's my supply depot, and as long as I'm within range of it, we're good.
Well, I'm trying to think back to Dark Sands, which was one that we enjoyed. I think the supply was much more simplified.
Yes.
And if you remember there was like a whole dead zone in the middle where it was like abstracted.
Yep.
Because of the vastness. But that was a good game of its own right. This is a very unique take on World War II North Africa, and I liked it.
And the game itself was good, but I really liked how within this kind of little series it's got going on, it felt this is very different from the other ones.
Yes.
And so that was also fun to see that. And I know it's like technically not part of that series, but kind of is.
So this is based off one of Mark's games from the 90s called The Legend Begins.
Yes.
And he's, taken that as a model, put his system, the 40X system, kind of over top of it in some ways, and created a new animal from that game.
Yeah, and the ways that it's similar is basically like the way that units function with their attack, defense, and moves, the iconography on it, the way that the odds ratios are calculated, it's column shifts instead of dice roll modifiers.
Yep.
The CRT is very familiar
Yep.
in its style, in the way that things work. The things like the determined defense that you always see in his games.
Yep.
That kind of stuff is very 40X. The zones of control will function differently.
Yep.
Which is where that's a big kind of departure from the Zarkbon system, because there's no Zarkbons in this one. But there's like overlapping Zarks, which sometimes function similarly, sometimes function differently.
To me, it's a concept of scale and vastness that the Zarkbons don't necessarily work.
They're not quite as punishing.
Right, but it's interesting because if you look at this based on what the situation is, it feels a lot like a traditional Hex Encounter war game that we've played many, many times. But there's a lot of uniqueness here. I've just really enjoyed this. I had a great time with this, frankly.
Yeah, I think because the hallmark of those Zark systems is that they're pretty low counter density. You can have one or two guys stacked, and you're going to have them pretty well spaced out.
Yep.
Because the Zark bonds, and that's what it does.
Yep.
Whereas this is the same amount of units as your other game, but they're all crushed up because you kind of have to have them next to each other still.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because I started out, I was like, oh, the Zark bonds. And I'm like, no, Grant, they don't work that way. Close those gaps and get the guys on top of each other. And that's what we kind of molded into. So there are things I would have done differently. The supply I would have done differently. The special supply truck thing I would have done differently. Probably would have bombed your ports a little bit more.
And that's one of those things. This rule book is not particularly long by war game standards. It's really like 26 pages of actual rules, 24 pages. But they are very, very detailed. There is a lot of small moving parts in this, and there was a lot of like this little bits in here, this little bits in here, this little bits in here. There will be things that you will get wrong. There will be things that you have to kind of really slow down and figure out. You will mess up a whole bunch in your first game.
Yep.
And then the next time you play it, you'll be much more informed, and you'll probably be able to do it a bit better.
Well, here's what I would say, because someone, as I was posting the pictures that we were going along on Twitter, somebody asked me, boy, you guys learn a lot of games. We hear that a lot.
Yes.
Right?
That is a true fact.
We hear that a lot. And it's like, we just read the rules and try it, right? But I made the comment to him, I'm like, you know what? Sometimes you set it up, you make a crap ton of mistakes.
Yes.
We were not playing things correctly that first couple of impulses. We just weren't.
Or we're not playing them optimally like
that's
a
what
seasoned player would play.
That's what I mean.
Yes.
We were fumbling around in the dark trying to make sense of this. And it's not overly complex. It's just a little more granular and grainy and crunchy than some of the other systems.
Yes.
But we made a lot of mistakes. We had a good time. We rolled some dice. And now I feel like we could set this back up and this is going to be a totally new game for us.
It'll be much more competitive.
Yep.
And because once you know the rules of a system, you know what you can do with it.
Yeah.
Oh, I can make this cool flanking maneuver if I've got a certain number of trucks and can do all this stuff.
Yep.
Instead of like, I drive into the desert and everyone died.
Yeah.
Like that's...
Yeah.
And it, you know, I actually enjoy our like first plays of some of these games.
Sure.
Because often we'll do like real stupid stuff. How many times was it? It's just a game.
I have said that 15 times. It's just a game. Just roll the dice.
In the second plays, there's very few of those. It's just a game because I want to win because we know better. But these first times, it's like, let's push all the buttons and pull all the levers and see what happens.
Yeah.
Oh, I messed it up. Oh, I should have done this. Great,
Yep.
we know much better for next time.
Yeah, no doubt. But that's the concept that you need to get into with this game. You got to just put it on the table.
Oh yeah, without question.
I can see a lot of people buying this, playing it solo, and they're going to be intimidated because it's a little different than some of the other 40X games.
Yes.
Just put it on the table, set it up, move some units around, learn the supply system, understand it, make your mistakes, and then start over.
Yep.
That's what you got to do with this one. This one you're going to have to play to get it down.
Yeah, I think what I would say is there are easier North Africa games and there are easier 40X games, but that doesn't mean that this could not be something that you should go out and get.
This is an excellent game.
Yes.
I loved what we did here, and I will love it when we play it again.
And
it's excellent.
There's just this extra layer of like struggle and thinking and puzzliness of making that supply work. That means this is just that step up more intense than something like, you know, Solano 43 or Holland 44. But it's not nearly, it shouldn't scare you off though either.
No.
So I really like that this kind of took a step into some complexity compared to those other ones.
Yeah.
So if you really want something that's kind of meaty and you get that extra layer of granularity, you can do that in this game.
Yeah.
But, you know, if this is like, maybe not for me, there's other 40X games which are still excellent as well. So don't let it scare you off.
No.
Because it was very, very, very cool and very good. And honestly, if you can grok this, that can set you up for some of those the next step even as well.
Yeah.
Where that wouldn't be quite so scary.
Boy, I hate seeing these black trucks there. they need to be empty. Can I just flip these over?
Yes.
I'm so tired of seeing those.
I will very briefly show you how this works, and then we'll wrap up with a few final thoughts. So here's a look at the map, or at least a very focused in part of the map. So we have this Tobruk defensive area here that's all surrounded, lots of stuff going on, and then there's this large... in turning the board around to set up this video, I knocked it, so all these are a bit messed up. There's this big line and screen of German and Italian forces and Commonwealth forces coming and trying to break that screen and relieve Tobruk. That's generally the tactical picture that you're looking at. But if you kind of look at the board and the setup of the board, this looks, just from an eye standpoint, quite different from those other 40X games. This is a theme that's come up in this video. Normally you would have kind of all these gaps and spaces between all of these. You wouldn't have quite so much density of the distribution of units, but the way that the EZOCs work and also kind of the tightness and concentration of action along the coastal roads means that by necessity you have much more close, condensed concentration of forces. So just know that that's something going into it. We also have, you'll notice, these big red discs. Those mark the victory point hexes for the Crusader scenario. We put those on. They're marked on the board with this tiny little blue star, but you also then just have counters on all of them, basically. So we put these nearby. Those don't come with the game. That's just some extra little wooden pieces I have kicking around for this kind of thing. So that's something that you won't see in the game. And real quick, people ask about these big discs. When we saw the unboxing video, hey, what are these big discs? These are quite simply little holding trays or holding boxes. You can see we've got the Axis one here with an air support marker and a Rommel marker. That's important because this is only a really small section of the board. And the way that the tables and charts are oriented, you both sit on the south edge of the map and you play kind of along it. And so this is just for picking your stuff up and moving it around. There's also these holding boxes for ones that you don't have available. It's just some markers, but then they can become available. You put them in here. These are the ones you can use. And basically, when you're playing the early game and all the action is happening in Benghazi and El Al-Khaila, you just sit down there and you move your stuff down there. When you're playing, you know, over in Tobruk, over in Tabadia, you just pick the stuff up and move it along, and it just stops reaching around to all the other boxes and tracks. It's a convenience thing, that's all it is. The game itself is played with this little sequence of play, which you can see here. And basically, you have a preparation phase at the beginning of a turn where you're going to kind of roll for Malta, do your reinforcements, get some little supply points, and kind of get yourself ready. Do any withdrawals, like some guys have to get pulled off to go and fight elsewhere, and you know, all that kind of regular admin stuff. And then you go through a set of 1, 2, 3, typically, impulses, and an impulse is I do all my stuff, and then the Axis player does all their stuff, depending on what time of year it is. In the summer months, which are marked on the calendar, you do not do, and that's it's basically July through the end of September. You only do 2 out of 3 impulses because it was just too hot, I presume, to make as much progress. Or historically there just wasn't as much, but they tie it into summer, so I presume it has to do with the weather as well. But basically, on your turn, you're going to kind of do your little initial phase. There's a little random events table, which was fun. You just roll 2d6, and most likely you're going to get resource points. And the resource points you're then going to spend on a little menu. You can buy air supports, or you can buy a bombing raid to try to destroy enemy supply, or try to repair supply in your ports if that's been damaged, and lots of other little bits and pieces. And then you basically get to the kind of the regular action cycle, which is you move all of the pieces of your faction that you want to, and then you do all of your combats. And then some of those combats, if you succeed and the enemy has to retreat a certain number of spaces, you can do kind of some breakthrough combats, things like that. And once you're done with all your combats, you do a little recovery phase where you rally guys who are disrupted, and then you check for your supply, and then it flips over to the opponent, and they're going to do all of their moves, all of their combats, and then you're going to do that. So that was one cycle, that was one impulse. You're going to do that again, a second impulse, and again a third impulse, and then you do like your supply attrition and victory phase and cleanup. So all of that to say that one turn in this game is the equivalent of like 3 turns in any other game, basically. So just know that that's what you're getting yourself into. Each turn, which again includes 3 impulses, represents about 2 weeks of time, 2.5 weeks of time. So there's 2 turns per month. And it's... So when you play the campaign, what I'm trying to say is it plays a little bit slowly. That's all. A lot of stuff happens, but progressing through the turns feels slow, but it's also like, it's a construct. So don't worry about it, is what I'm saying. We'll look at a couple counters here. If you've played any of the 40X series, these counters will look extremely familiar to you. Indeed, they are identical to the other ones in the series. So you have, on the left-hand side, the 5 is an attack value. The central number, the 7, is the defensive value. And the 3 is, on the right-hand side, is the movement value. They also have this little 2 on the black background. That's the stacking limit. And the 9, I believe, is the turn of entry. So this is obviously an infantry unit. This is a motorized infantry unit. It's not nearly as strong. There's not nearly as many people in it. And it's only worth 1 stacking point as opposed to the 2 here. So this is a full division, and this is a battalion, I believe. Happy to be wrong about that. But very familiar. They have a reversed side. If they have one, this one's blank. It's a 1-step unit. This one's a 2-step unit, and the factors go down. They got the white stripe to let you know that they are they've lost a step. Basically, on your turn, you are going to move guys. You're going to move them. Road movement and track movement is better. Moving in all these clear deserts is like 1 hex. So a lot of the time you have a good chunk of freedom of movement, unless you're fighting like out in the rough in this Jebel, or there's some rough kind of in the kind of on the northern edge of the, I don't know, the Derna Peninsula. That's not what it's called, but up there you got some kind of more rougher terrain. And so a lot of the terrain or the kind of movement restrictions come from what you and your opponent choose to do to each other. So again, this is a level of proactivity. So normally this is all open terrain, but you put your forces there, and that either that's where I've got to stop. The terrain features is the opponents and their fortifications, or or it forces me into terrain, but then you're going to swing round. So I feel like a lot of other games, you know, the terrain is either extremely punishing, where you just stick to the roads, or like there's like a big marsh and like you cannot afford to go in there, so you go around it. Think about the Pripyat marshes in every East Front game, right? Going through that is a choice that you make. In this one, yeah, you got all the coastal road and stuff that you're kind of forced to use, especially for supply, but all this open terrain means that there's a lot more openness for these flanking maneuvers, as was historically done, but also your units are the terrain. Your units are the blocking terrains and the features of that. And I just think there's a lot more openness of that in these desert warfare games that I really enjoy. So moving guys is simply expending your movement points, and then when everyone's lined up like they are, you start getting into combats. And the combats are quite traditional if you've played a 40x game, any one of other simulators in this line, where you will get an odds-based ratio. You will have some column shifts depending on a certain number of modifiers. Those are mostly all listed right here. You're going to roll 1d6 and you are going to hope for the best. We talked a little bit about the CRT, and the CRT has a lot of results on it. Even at a 1-to-1, you're going to do something to the opponent 2/3 of the time. You know, you're also going to take some losses, but you will do something. In so many other games, on a 1-to-1, there's usually one good thing for the attacker, and everything else is pretty crappy, honestly. And so being able to DR2, to dislodge enemies, force them to retreat, is extremely valuable in this game. And you can do that pretty decently, even at kind of bad odds in reality. So that's something that I thought was very interesting about this game. This is a very, it is hard to stand your ground, unless, of course, you do the classic determined defense, which there's stipulations about how and when you can do that. And if you're rolling in this kind of orange or this brick or terracotta section, you can't do DDs if it's this bad, and it's worse. You get a worse die roll penalty if you're in the kind of orange section. So you get all those. This is all very hallmark of this system. But to do a combat, you're going to look at your guys and you're just going to compare the odds and see what you've got going on ratio-wise. So let's just set up a little combat here. We get a tank, and man, I will do this right here so that we can kind of all see what's going on. Let me just clear these guys out of the way. Nobody cares. Okay. So let's say we got these 2 units here, and they're going to attack into this German unit. So it's pretty standard numbers-wise. So we have a 6 attack factor and a 6 attack factor. So we've got 12 altogether. 12 to 3 puts us on the 4-to-1 table. And if we use attack supply, which I will talk about here in just a second, what attack supply enables us to levy more than 9 points of attack strength. If you don't commit attack supply, you can only commit a maximum of 9. So we're going to say that we had to spend it for this. So we've got 12. The attack supply also enables us to get this little superscript 2 tank advantage. The tank advantage is important because, again, if you don't commit your attack supply, they don't have enough fuel, enough shells to be as important and impactful in the combat. They're being used as infantry support, or it's not as many tanks as we thought. So committing that attack supply is both important to leverage a number of attack factors, but it also unlocks that tank bonus. So we've got 2 tank shifts from that. We don't have elite combined arms, that's something else. If you have artillery nearby, you can commit artillery to it, which we won't do for this. So we're at 4-1, and the tank shifts, we have that 2 superscript here. They have nothing, so we have a difference of 2. That's the maximum amount of shifts you can get from tanks, so we're going to get 2 shifts from that. That's really good. And if we had air support on our available assets, those are German ones, you could commit that first as the attacker and then secondarily as the defender, but you could only do defensive air support if you have air superiority, which the Germans don't in this scenario. So we're looking at 4-1 initially, and then we got 2 shifts from our tanks, because this is a great attack. It's rare that you'll be able to do this, so we're going to roll on the 6-1 table. So we're going to take our little dice, and we're going to roll it, and of course I rolled a 2. That's very me. So 2 on a 6-1 is D1, and then we can advance 3. So we're going to go to the D1 portion of the table. Defender loses 1 step. Surviving defenders must retreat 2 or 3 hexes and become disrupted. The attacker may advance 3 hexes. So these guys are going to flip over. They're going to lose that 1 step, and then they have to retreat. And they're going to retreat 2 or 3 hexes. We get advance 3, so they are going to, let's see, how are we going to do this? 2 or 3 hexes, and they become disrupted. Okay, I just want to make sure that's the case. The attacker may advance up to 3 hexes. And am I a Matilda? That's also important. There's a lot of different distinctions. So these Matildas, they're very strong with their 4 and their 3 tank modifier, but they are very, very slow. And so they can't advance as rapidly, and their movement kind of sucks. So they're going to retreat a couple of spaces, and we can advance, and we can do that. One of the interesting things about this game is when you're forced to advance more than 2 spaces as the defender, this is a leg unit, they simply can't run away fast enough. So if you have to retreat that 3rd or 4th space, depending on some of the combat results make you go 4 spaces, they move 2 spaces and then they surrender, which is really interesting. And it's one of the reasons that you might have them, well, that's an allied one. Where's my German trucks at? If they're stacked with a truck, they retreat, they get on the trucks and they drive away, and they can drive plenty of spaces before they're overrun. But if it's just leg units on their own, they cannot go that far. And I just think that's a really interesting little concept. And basically when they go in the surrendered box, which is just off map, it's like the eliminated box, except it takes like 2 turns to get out of surrendered back into the eliminated box, from which you can be reconstituted. So it just is a further delay as your manpower is reduced through surrender. But these guys can then kind of move up. But then the interesting thing is you can then start doing breakthrough. So you could attack that unit again. Breakthrough combat is the only kind of combat where your formation matters. So, for example, if we had a bunch of these New Zealanders stacked together, only the New Zealanders could attack again. It's whoever's in the same formation can do that breakthrough attack. So we'd have to leave behind these guys, and we'd only get the 12 factors instead of 14 if we'd had activated all those guys. Other than that, the formations really don't matter. They only matter for the breakthrough, from what I could tell. But, you know, combat is moving, attacking, doing losses. Very, very traditional stuff. So the really important stuff that we want to talk about is the supply. The supply in this game is so key. When you are when you're out of supply, your attack strength is halved, I believe. Let me make sure that I'm saying that right. And your movement is real bad as well. Or I think maybe you can't attack. I know because I always would get the disrupted and the out of supply mixed up. So let me just double check so we don't say anything silly. And out of supply units. I know it's not great. Yeah, you can only make attack moves, your attack strength is halved, and you can only advance after combat once. Basically, it is not good. I think when you're disrupted, you might not be able to do any attacks. You just have to sit there and kind of retreat. Movement, combat, yes. Disrupted, you can't attack. Out of supply is attack at half strength, and you can't really move well or advance after combat. So, why is that important? Well, being out of supply, you would like to have your units at full strength. So, a couple things. What I had mentioned before was attack supply. So, to launch any kind of attack with more than 9 strength points, which you will want to do as much as you can, kind of, you need to spend 1 supply. And this supply is going to come from either an MSU, a mobile supply unit, if I can, there we go. And he's on his MSU side, and he's got a little 1 on the truck. He's carrying 1 supply. When that's consumed, he flips over, and he's just an empty truck. Now, an empty truck can carry troops, like we said, for avoiding retreats, or he can drive back or warp to supply points to pick up more supply. But the other thing to note is in that top left-hand corner, he has a 5 range. He can supply an attack that is 5 spaces away from him, and he also extends supply lines by that amount as well. So, normally, to be in supply, you have to be able to trace 5 hexes back to a road, and then be able to follow that road all the way back to your supply sources, which are effectively ports. Alexandria is unlimited, Tripoli is not, and Benghazi has a bunch, but the Axis are going to have a real hard time with their supply. They have to be very, very careful, and they have to take more ports to keep everyone in supply, but then you need more guys to take the ports, and you have to keep them in supply to do it. It's a great puzzle. But what you're going to do is, if you find yourself overstretched, so this dude, he can go 1, 2, go back to this road, but this road is all blocked up with enemy units, or it goes off map to nothing. Technically, if you play the optional rules, this little oasis just off map at the bottom of this road can supply 1 unit, but that's optional. And say we're playing without that. This guy, he can't get back. He needs to get back to this road, because then he can follow this road all the way back, all the way up here. It's just off map, you can't really see it, but all the way up here, and then this highway goes back to Alexandria. But he doesn't have enough. You have to trace 5 hexes back to this road. However, this guy, if he's an MSU and he sits here, you can go 5 hexes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 back to him, and he can go 5 hexes, 1, 2, 3, 4 back to the road, and then all of these guys are in supply. And you can do that with an unlimited amount of trucks. So if this guy is trying to really outflank guys, and he's driving up here, this is wildly risky, but if you want to have it where you've got all these trucks stringing out supply to these guys, you can do that if you want. It's a really fun kind of exercise to make all that work. So that's just to keep guys in supply for those outflanking maneuvers. You can use them that way. Primarily though, more often at least, you'll be using them for attack supply, so that we can attack with 14 strength points instead of 8, basically. And to do that, you just flip him over to consume that supply point. He's an empty truck now, but that enables us to launch that attack. But also, let's say we've got, well, we can't have that many guys together, but it also unlocks the tank bonus as well, which you will want on many occasions as well. And then the other thing you can do is you can also ping artillery to get more shifts. But the other thing you can do is you can use your artillery / HQs to extend the range of supply. So these mobile supply units, they're on trucks, they're driving around, they got this 5 range where they can kind of throw their supply out. But a lot of your supply will be in these static supply points. And the static supply points only have a little range of 3 hexes. There we go, 3 hexes, which is far more limiting. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it really makes a big difference. But what you can do is, if you've got those stacked with, for example, this guy, this HQ, he's an ASU, he's an artillery support unit, or HQ. If he sits on here, the supply point gains the command range of this guy, which is also the artillery range. I know that's a lot, but now he can be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hexes away, and this is what we joked about, where he's shooting the hamburgers out of the cannon so that those guys can have enough food to go and fight. Like, it's, you flip him over, so he's depleted, and they get the attack supply. Now, to put this guy back to normal, you then have to consume one of these 2 supply, and you have to be sat with him. So you still use the same amount of supply, it just comes off at a slightly different time, and these act as range extenders for these static supplies. Or you just use your trucks. You drive your trucks up, you consume the supply for those guys who are attacking, and then what you do is there is something called, special truck transfer. And the special truck transfer can warp to any of your home off-map holding box, so they can warp all the way across the map. They just bugger off back to Alexandria, and you put them there, and in Alexandria, that's where you'll be placing supply every turn. So they then pick up that supply, and then they drive it across the map, so it's the quick out, and slowly drive it back on the board. Although, you know, with your faux strategic movement, it can be pretty fast. So then you have that cycle of picking those up, and you'll have some in your ports on the coastal road, some in Alexandria, for example, but it's moving those guys out, warping them, moving them back. But again, if you're doing that, this guy, you're not really using them as range extenders, or you might be using a couple of these as range extenders, and you might have a couple more who are dedicated driving the trucks around. This really is a bit of a trucking simulator, and that sounds real bland, but it is fascinating to do because you have to make all that work, and to basically to do anything meaningful in the game. Because if you're not doing that, your guys they'll be driving around just fine, but the only attacks you'll be able to levy are pretty pathetic ones. And, you know, when you're going up against a unit that has a 7 strength, and you can muster at most 9 attack points against that 7 defense, you're always going to be rolling on this 1-to-1. Now, the 1-to-1 is less bad than other games, but it's still a gamble. And doing that regularly, you're going to hurt yourself, and you're not going to make the progress you need to. So you have to keep that supply train coming. And that is a huge portion of this game, and it's a great thesis, and it's really, really fun. I know this looks like a bit of a mess. I hope that was at least somewhat helpful. But normally the supply stuff in a game is either like real abstract or super mega crunchy. This sits right in between those two, where you get to do it, and it's proactive, and it's interesting, and there's a lot of choice, and there's a lot of jeopardy. Like, if your supply lines and your trucks get cut and killed and captured, it's real bad. So it's something really to consider. But also it's not so involved where you have to write things down on a piece of paper. So that was kind of a look at the game. What we'll do is we'll wrap up with a few final thoughts. So that was a look at the game. I had a really good time playing this.
No doubt.
I don't know what I was expecting going into it, but it was much thinkier.
Yeah.
Like, we've played a lot of the games in this series, and we can set those up, and I look at the Chrome, hey, new to me page.
Well, there's a lot of familiarity.
And we can go.
Yep.
This one was
a little bit different.
Yeah, a bit more of like, okay, let's figure this out. Mm-hmm. What's reasonable? What's unreasonable? How do I get my army to function? Because they do not march on empty stomachs, and they do not shoot guns that do not have bullets. And so that was like a whole extra layer to it, which was fun to see, kind of like an old friend, but with like a new, new aspects to it.
Yeah.
It was really cool.
Well, and the other thing I think is very important in this game, understanding the pacing element. So if you're playing the campaign game, and we talked about this in the other video we shot, there are 19 turns.
Yes.
About 60% of those are 3 impulse turns. The other 40% are 2 impulse turns, the summer turns, right? It's just too hot.
It's too hot.
It's too hot. So that means we figured there are about 50 action turns in this game.
Yep.
There are going to be some times where you're going to be doing this and you're going to be like, I've spent myself. I don't have any supply. My trucks are out of position. My units aren't in good shape. You know what? I'm going to take advantage of the special supply rule where I don't do anything.
Yeah, if you basically do nothing, you get one
supply
free supply point.
And typically you're going to put that, wasn't it near your main headquarter?
You can either put it in your off-map box.
No, don't do that. Don't do that.
Unless you're in desperation mode.
Yeah.
Or you can put it with a good order HQ or ASU.
Yeah. So I've got my HQ there, and I'm like, okay, I flipped that over, and all of a sudden I felt better about it because I had 2 supply with this third one over here, and I had a truck coming in. But you've got to understand that pacing. And the normal ebb and flow of that is typically going to be the ally player has the initiative.
Yep.
You're probably going to decide, I've spent myself, I'm doing it. And then that kind of gives the Axis player almost permission
Yes.
to go, okay, I'm going to do it too.
Yeah, and then it's like, or if you're in a good spot, you could maybe take advantage.
Take an event and get an attack. But then you're going to be out of supply, and you're going to have to do that again in the future, and then he's going to take advantage of it.
That's the joy of campaign games to me.
Yeah.
Is figuring out that timing and when it's okay to assess, like, you also don't have much supply.
Right.
So I'm going to go ahead and, like, I can pretty safely gamble.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm not really going to do anything. I'll do some attack moves, but I'm not going to do any attacks.
Yep.
And I'm going to get that supply point, which is going to really help set me up.
Yep. But that, I cannot emphasize how important that is. And what an important choice that is as well. We also talked about it recently. We've played a couple of games that have that kind of concept. The total domination from Phalanx, it doesn't have to do with supply. It has to do with the technology.
Yes.
So when one player does it, and puts a card down that they're developing a technology, it's almost like the other player.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I got to do it too.
You didn't attack me, so I'm going to do it too.
Yeah.
Because you also don't want to get behind in that.
and
you don't want to get behind in supply. You don't want to get behind in technology. So, it's such a great concept.
Because they're so important. And to me, that's a concept of the pacing. You can't run armies at full bore 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They're going to burn themselves out. Literally, figuratively, emotionally. There's going to be a lull. There's going to be ebbs and flows in battles, and you need to, in this one, be a good commander and understand that. I like that.
Yes.
That's a cool concept. In my mind, I'm like, ooh, that's kind of nice that actually is forced upon me because of the way the system works.
Yeah, and I think because the supply system's so detailed and so proactive, that's a consideration. Whereas in a lot of war games where it's like, at the end of your turn, make sure you can go to your map edge. You lose out on that aspect of what happens if we take a pause. A lot of other war games, it's just like go, 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 go.
Yeah.
And I like that there's the opportunity for those lulls to get us to kind of get yourself in order. Do a couple rearrangements and then just
do some tack moves, just move around.
Just get a little bit of supply and move so that you can propel yourself forward.
You take a couple disrupted markers off, because you didn't do anything. And But that's I like that.
I love it.
We play a lot of games where it's like go, 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 go. I'm thinking of the Red Box series, and it's like, man, you just go, 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 right? I'm going to attack you. I'm going to attack you again, and then I'm going to do breakthrough combat. And you can have breakthrough combat here. But you better be careful, because you're literally going to get out of position. Now, I was thinking I feel like I'm going on and on.
No.
A couple of times I was like, if I did that breakthrough combat, I could run over here and I could kill your truck. And I was thinking about that, and I almost did it one time, but then I thought, well,
then I die.
I'm screwed, right?
Yes.
And I didn't want those units to be screwed. So, but that's a concept. If you're not smart and sharp about your placements, there might be a time where it's like, okay, I can get that truck, and bam, oh, you had a supply on that? Sorry, and that's gone.
And suddenly that cuts all of that, and then all those guys that were relying on that trade are now all done. You're like,
yep.
So you have to be very careful about your extended supply lines.
Yeah, and it was unique because I don't think you had captured trucks, right?
I don't think
we
so.
We decided that you did not.
I'm pretty sure I don't.
But the Axis has a couple of captured truck markers.
And there's like a rule in there, which we never got to, but...
Right. But I almost got to it a couple of times, but I think that's cool.
It's an optional rule, but you would do it.
Well, yeah,
if an allied truck is present when an allied stack surrenders, then the Axis player gains a captured truck.
And why would you have a truck with a stack? It's because when they have to retreat more than 2 spaces ever from an attack, and they don't have a truck, they surrender.
Yeah, like
so you got to be careful about that. And I'm not sure we did a whole lot of that.
No, I did have. Somewhere,
I think I had one
somewhere kicking around. I did have some guys. It was this Indian division over here. They were with the truck driving up the road.
So my other question is, at what point do 3, right at higher odds? No, that's advanced 3. I don't see any defender retreats 3 though. I just don't remember that.
We did have results of that,
didn't we? Maybe I just don't remember. Anyway, 2 or 3 hexes. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, that's another unique concept. But hell yeah, I would play with that optional rule every time. In fact, we were playing with it. I was just trying to. Yeah, I didn't know we were playing with it.
There's also the Oasis supply.
I saw that. So there's some Oases. Yeah,
that gives you 1 supply point.
Well. That's not fair. I don't want to play with that one. Well, you've got too many supplies, too many Oases. You got too much supply as it is. But yeah, this was a great game. I enjoyed it. Loved it. Had a great time. Would play it again in a heartbeat. This would be a fun one to set up at a Buckeye Game Fest and
this is a big game. It is a detailed game. It's not for the faint of heart, but also you should give it a go.
No doubt.
Dive on in.
Just set it up and give it a try. There's no war game referees running around saying, oh, you screwed that up. Hell, we screw up rules all the time.
Yes.
We released a video the other day and people were like, you played that wrong. And I'm like, yep.
Yep.
But you know what? It didn't break the game because it just made the game that much harder.
Yes.
And it was more enjoyable. I loved it. But anyway, so I'm done. I've said enough.
Yes.
I've said my piece.
Okay.
Good job, Mark, by the way.
We're going to say one more thing about this game, and that is that the mounted maps don't fit in the box.
No, they do not.
And the lip where the mounted maps join...
I would not recommend the mounted maps.
It's not great.
Nope.
And this, the larger board, it's kind of divided a little bit, and it's a little bit warped. So it doesn't... And the crease is like right on where you have a ton of units.
It is right. And it's so odd. I would have just made this a little longer and done it along a hex edge. None of these are hex sides. I don't get that.
So yeah,
you understand what I'm saying?
For me, this is a paper maps game.
I would, and I got the paper maps.
Yeah.
I've got them back at my house. These I'll probably sell, right, or give away or something, and we'll just use the paper maps.
Yeah,
but
because the 2 paper maps will fit in a box with a counter trade just fine.
Yeah, and they're overlapped about an inch with if you put these in there.
That was my only beef. Everything else is fine.
Well, production's good. I didn't see any real errata. I didn't download the errata. I'm sure there's some.
Sure.
But, yeah, great game. I enjoy it. I'm going to say it. This is going to be in my top 10. There's no doubt.
I would say, that is probably an easy sell for
I
me
don't think it's going to be in my top, say, 3 or 4, because there were some other really good Hex Encounter games.
There's been some very good games this year.
This one's definitely going to be in my top 10. Yeah. I really enjoyed it that much. No doubt.
Yeah.
As is On to Richmond, I'm going to be honest. That was fun. So
yes. And I'm going to say it again. I really liked that this was kind of a step up in its complexity.
Yeah.
And it really is only from that added layer of supply, but it really changed. This was a very rich game.
Yeah.
And I really, really, really liked that aspect of it as well.
Yep.
So, North Africa 41 from GMT Games. Check this out if this is something you're interested in. You should be. I've been Alexander from PlayerSaid.com.
And I'm Grant.